All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Revenue Optimists. This is a space where go-to-market and revenue operations leaders can come together to learn from one another in order to grow their businesses. My name is Dave Nelson, and with me today, I'm very fortunate to have Anne Pao, 5 times revenue operations leader, who's now actually just opened her own business. So Anne, thank you very much for joining us. Do you mind telling us a bit more about yourself and the new business?
Sure. Thanks so much, Dave. Really excited to be here. And yes, as you shared, so I bring 20 years of experience, finance, operations, analytics, across the board, from anything to pre-IPO to post-IPO companies. And I'm really ready to take that experience to the next level, helping lots of different companies on their growth trajectory. And so I'm launched Ignite Consulting, which is a go-to-market operations and strategy fractional consulting firm. And yeah, excited to be here to talk more.
Congratulations. That's super exciting. Good for you for taking that plunge. I know it's definitely daunting to do that. So do you mind telling us a little bit more about what it means to be a fractional RevOps?
Sure. So fractional is kind of just a fancy term for kind of part-time, if you will. But when you want to think about the value of somebody who's coming in fractionally, revenue operations leaders we're pretty expensive, right? Senior leaders who have really been there, done that multiple times. And so many companies right now aren't just thinking about growth. They're thinking about scalable growth. They're thinking about, how do I really put the foundation in that's going to support my entire company's scale and hitting our targets and whatnot. So what if you could access the expertise from somebody who's helped build those go-to-market engines multiple times and kind of catch the mistakes you might make years down the line without that leader? That's where fractional RevOps really comes into play. So you're getting access to a leader who's been there, done that, supporting sales, marketing, customer success, product, taking things to market and helping it scale up at a more accessible rate, and then having to wait until you're, a Series D or E company and you're really ready to invest.
That's amazing. It's such a good idea. So what does a typical engagement look like without going into too much detail? Is it, short? Is it regular weekly touch bases? Is it projects?
Yeah, great question. I believe in meeting people where they are. So that can be anything from, hey, I just need somebody to, call the bat phone, if you will. I'm thinking about doing this. Am I going down the right path? I just need to be a sounding board, to something a little bit more involved, a few days a week, or maybe you need somebody to help you build the function itself. Hire the team, develop the team, up-level the team, put the process, system, structure in place to take you to the next level. So I really adapt my style to the needs of the business and where you're at in your journey.
Oh, that's awesome. And you know what? We're very fortunate to have you here giving us some free advice and to everyone in the community. So when you come into an engagement, or maybe in the 5 times in the past that you have been that revenue operations leader at a business, where do you typically start? Where do you dive in? And what does that look like?
In terms of what you should do to get started, I usually, and you can start this as a sheet, there are tools out there that help you with this, but really just going and talking to all of the different leaders and the teams on the ground, supporting those go-to-market teams and saying, what are the key core pieces of technology that you either use or have implemented? Start listing it out. But it's not just a list of the tech. I then try to unpack, why was this purchased? And this may sound really obvious, but where is the contract? Oftentimes I find nobody knows where the contracts are. There's no procurement function in a lot of these earlier stage companies. And that's really critical for me to go and read the contract, read what we've purchased. Did we implement all of it? Do the teams actually know what we've purchased? Did we train them on it? So there's a lot of reasons why tech is generally underutilized. And it could be because the product is poor. It could be because nobody knows about it. It could be because the person who bought it left the company. It could be because nobody was trained on it. The last thing that I often see is it wasn't embedded into any of their day-to-day workflows. So it's my job to really unpack what is in terms of the tech state and why is that tech state in the state that it is today.
Nice. Okay. And so I can imagine that's an exercise, just finding the contracts, like you said. I love that idea about diving in to see what was actually in the contract and what wasn't. A lot of what you said resonated, because I can imagine that now that you've done that, you've figured out, okay, these are the 20 systems or whatever it may be that they have. Why aren't they being more heavily leveraged? Mm-hmm. What's the process on going through that when you find out that, it was something that someone bought, thought was a great idea, but then left the business and so didn't get rolled out, or for any number of reasons hasn't been implemented? Is it
Yeah.
a rip it out, or is it
No, it's
trying
not
it
an immediate rip out, although I'm not afraid to rip out technology. If any of the vendors are listening to this, who that's happened, they're like, yes, she has. But I will say that before I rip anything out, I want to understand maybe the person's left the company. Is anybody else using it? I also think there's an opportunity. I worked at Medallia for several years to survey your go-to-market leaders. Are any of you making use of this? Or you ask them in a team meeting if you have some sort of staff, and what are you using it for? What value are you deriving out of it? How are you using it to power your decision making? What core processes are dependent on it? Very quickly, you'll find out if everyone's like, oh, I don't know, actually. Well, that's probably something that's pretty ripe for churn, unless you see a problem, which is why that listening tour is so key, because maybe there's a core problem on the ground and this technology solution could really help you solve that problem. No need to rip it out just to go through another procurement cycle and 2 months later, once you've really identified what those problems are and the path towards a solve.
No, I believe it. Yeah, because usually everyone's got a great head on their shoulder and they've bought it for a reason, right? It wasn't just because their buddy was selling it. And that it's the execution of it, right? It's the rollout, it's the adoption, it's the coordination with all the other systems that play into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'll share actually one story. Years ago, I joined a company and they were using a analytics solution that they had purchased and they had never fully implemented for months. And I said, well, what are the issues with this? And they're like, oh, we had errors. We purchased this product and ultimately it didn't configure to our needs. And it's just been delayed and delayed and delayed. And so before I decided to turn, I went to that vendor. We had a conversation. We talked about the problem. I said, this is what we need to solve. And this is the time we need to solve it. Are you able to help me? They made it very, very difficult. So I churned them, to be honest. But I did not churn them until I had a solution that I was able to onboard and migrate my teams to, so that I wasn't leaving my teams like high and dry without anything even in the roadmap for the future.
So the idea was still good. The need was still there, but let's find technology that's a better fit that might be able to get you to hit those targets, those timelines
more quickly. And that's the other thing. One other story I'll share, because I think illustratively is important. Illustrating this is important, which is that when I joined another company, I don't mind talking about what that product was. It was Clary. And I was at Medallia. We were early buyers of Clary. Clary had been purchased before I joined. And I remember saying, oh, well, what's this tool? Oh, Clary, we're using it. And I said, well, what's the level of usage? And no one had gone in as a technical admin and actually looked at the back end. Well, I had realized that we had deployed it to 250 people, but no one was logging in. No one was using it. And then I actually spent some time to come up to speed with the product. I'm like, wow, this could be pretty powerful. We have some issues with our forecasting. But what I did first is I pulled down all of those licenses and I said, we're not going to launch this at 250. We're going to start with our very bespoke use case. We're going to scale it, make sure we get it right. And then we're going to roll it out. So I basically scaled it back. Didn't matter. We had an unlimited license. And then I started with the sales team, the sales leadership team, made sure that they really understood, that they were bought in, that we built the process around it. We ended up rescaling it to 350 people at the company. But I think what the real core issue there was they'd purchased a tool, they'd rolled it out once at an SKO, and then they'd never trained anybody else on it again. They hadn't embedded into workflows. I see that so many times with technology.
Just hoping that people will then take to it. Oh, I saw the presentation and I'll start using it.
Right. Yeah. And you really have to, salespeople are busy. People in the field are busy. Even though, yes, we're living in this cloud technology age, I don't think people want to just in their free time spend all their time in technology, particularly sellers. They need to be talking to customers. So how do we very simply focus their efforts on this is the core application of this product? I'm going to train you up on how to use it. I'm going to get you to be very proficient so you can train everybody else. I'm a big fan of train the trainer. And then once we embed it into the workflows, it became the tool of choice at that point in time.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So what would you recommend to others going through this exact same thing? Because I'm sure a ton of people are, for getting that re-rolled out and better adopted versus the, hey, we presented it, now go use it approach.
Yeah. I mean, I want to actually take it back into the sales cycle because, I've bought a lot of technology. I've implemented a lot of technology and then I scaled or changed technology, as we just talked about. I think the first part is when you are procuring, I see this happen a lot. And I've been that person. I mean, I think I early on maybe got sold in a little too hard and by all the bells and whistles of a product. Really know what not the 15 things you're going to do with a product are. Know the top 2 to 3. Tie it to a core initiative that your cares about. How are you going to know that this was successful? It's going to have helped you solve this 1 or 2 problems on the ground. That is what you need to tie it to. And that's how you're going to really stress test whether it was useful. Maybe there will be things that emerge later, but you need to be very, very clear on the use case, right? And that's important because then when you're talking about the product, you're not just talking about the product and its features, you're talking about the product and its features and how it's going to solve a very deep problem that people identify with. That I think is critical. So you do that in the sales cycle. Hopefully it goes well. You select your product, you roll it out. Once you roll it out, I personally like to ensure that this is not viewed as a RevOps thing. This is viewed as a go-to-market tool that is going to accelerate our growth. So having your core champions in the field actually involved in the rollout, they're the ones training their teams. They are your power users. So important. It was why that Clary example, I made sure that my regional directors knew Clary inside and out. Once they really understood it, then we could scale it to their individual contributors on their team. And it went from there. But otherwise, it just feels like I'm batting somebody over the head, trying to get them to use a tool.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I suppose it probably depends on what the tool is and whether it's for the sales reps themselves and whether you could kind of integrate it into a one-on-one meeting or whether it's for the RevOps folks. Maybe it's an internal automation or a cleanup tool or something.
But all those people are going to have core use cases that they need to solve for. And it needs to be crystal clear how they're going to use the product to help them in their day-to-day. Too many times I'll get asked. I was just talking with an executive last week who said, Anne, I really need to have somebody come in and we have these 4 product lines and I need somebody to come in and build a go-to-market strategy for us. These are what the 4 products do. And they talked to me all the way through their products. And at the end of the conversation, I said, I still don't know what your end customer is supposed to do with the product and what they're doing in their day-to-day and why it matters to them. So you need to flip the script a little bit.
Yeah, smart. So then if you are on the RevOps side and you're the purchaser of these products, hopefully you have a good understanding of why you're buying it or why you bought it in the past. Are you then consolidating that and cataloging it so that now people have this better understanding? Or is it just we're trying to get the whole team involved in understanding those use cases that you talked about, those 2 to 3 use cases for each tools?
Good question. So I'll build some sort of like ROI business case that I'll use for my internal executives to convince them this is something that we need to fund. These are kind of the 3 core problems we're going to solve. These are the capabilities. These are who we looked at. This is how they scored. In addition to what the use case is, this is something that I did when I purchased Gong for one of the first times. It wasn't just about what is the ROI, because what does that mean? The ROI for forever, for end of time. If you're talking to a CFO, they don't care. They want to know what it means now. And so in addition, I said, here are the core problems. Here's the ROI that we expect. The good news is I have the access to that data because I'm the head of RevOps. And then in addition, here's the payback period. And this is what we're going to be instrumenting to ensure that we realize that payback. So it really talked a lot less about the product and more operationally what I was going to be doing and embedding in terms of process or altering process and integrating that technology into that. That gave, I think, in that company, my CFO and my chief commercial officer a real level of confidence that this has a plan for scale. This has a plan for high adoption and utilization. And it's about something that I care about as an executive.
That is super smart. I like that a lot because then you can not just showcase that we're buying it, it's going to help us with this, but how are we actually going to roll it out? Because so much of any project like that is about the change management and the adoption versus the tool itself.
100%. 100. And I'll say one more thing. I think the change management aspect, we talked about this, so important because it's not just, rolling it out, having an enablement. Other tactics that I've used are the following. So you have your onboarding session. We integrate it into your new hire onboarding. In our case, whoever in the go-to-market needs to have exposure to this. And there might be varying levels because maybe you have a fully embedded license, lots of capability. Somebody else has a viewer license. You have to factor it for that. But they get that once they join the company. So it's part of their onboarding to their role. I then additionally usually have some sort of Slack community where people can go and I post regular tips. They can post questions, so they're getting engagement. In addition, we'll have refresher training courses. And so I think these are other tools that you can help them train up. But the best tool is this becomes how we operate. I don't want to have some tool that I use once a quarter to do something. I want to use a tool regularly. I'm a person that when I believe in your product, I'm a high advocate. And if I'm not getting that level of adoption, you're going to be at risk.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you are rolling all that out and they're going through their onboarding and they're getting trained on it, is that like a one-on-one thing? Or you mentioned train the trainer? Is that up to their leader to train them on it? Or is that RevOps that does that time and time again?
It depends on like the size of the company. So in companies where we've had an enablement function and I've had enablement be part of RevOps, we incorporated that into our new hire onboarding. There was typically some sort of onboarding. These are the key tools you need to do your job. And ideally it's role-based because everyone has different tools based on their roles, as they should, because they have a different part of the go-to-market. Here are the core competencies you need to gain with respect to this tool. Here is an ongoing deck. And then here's where you go if you have questions. But also remember, I am really investing time to ensure that my leaders are deep experts in our core must-have tools so that I don't have to be there all the time to train people. I mean, I've had one of my former VPs of sales teach me things about tools that I've implemented because they just became such fans and advocates. And that's what I want. I want my stakeholders knowing more and being hungry to learn more about the product. That means I brought in the right product for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you have people asking for more of it, it's obviously a huge fit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You mentioned creating a Slack channel for this. Mm-hmm. Is that one Slack channel for each of the products that you roll out? Is that one Slack channel for kind of all of your tech stack questions? Or
it's typically whatever is the most widely used tool that we spend the most time in partnership of RevOps with the go-to-market functions. I'll have it bespoke to that because people get kind of overwhelmed. I won't have one for every single tool. Again, let me give you an example. One of my last companies, we had 45 tools at that company. I've been at other companies. When I was at Medallia, we had 200 plus tools in the enterprise systems landscape, a lot of tech, right? So that would be overwhelm. But it's also, I imagine with some teams, sales development teams, they're going to have SalesLoft or maybe Outreach as their core tool. And rather than them having a Slack, they're probably talking about it in their team channel a lot. We also would have a different training mechanism because they were really our residential experts of those kind of outreach type tools. But they would be actually training the sellers. I didn't train. I had my head of sales development train, and it was much more impactful.
Nice. Yeah. So we've had some success doing something similar in the past where if we're rolling out a new piece of tech, we'll have a Slack channel for that. But then once we're over that hump and people have started to adopt it, we usually archive that. Yeah. And people can still ask about it in our BT channel or just generic one. But I can imagine that as new people are starting who haven't been exposed to it, haven't gone through that, it might still be helpful to have that.
Yeah, it's actually a good question. One thing I just thought of is on one of my last companies, and this came from one of our sales leaders. I think they called it "There's No Stupid Question" channel. And that was the name of the channel. There is no stupid question. And I mean, the sellers really adopted that heavily. I mean, there were a lot of questions, and it was anything from process to, how do I bypass this security protocol that's really painful to how do I get access to XYZ tool? And so I've seen that be really helpful. And we usually had that the first month or month and a half of somebody's new tenure, just so they felt like they had a helping hand for the ad hoc things that come up, particularly in this remote world that we're in.
Smart. Yeah, that's great. Now, I imagine that in amongst this audit, in amongst this review of systems, there's probably not just purchased tech, but maybe built in-house tech as well. Is that fair?
Oh, gosh, good question. I guess this is kind of around the build versus buy. And totally. I'm a big fan of technology. And I don't think you have to purchase everything. I mean, Salesforce is a really powerful platform. You can build a lot there. My teams have built things that we couldn't find something that existed. I guess I'm going to take your question a little bit differently because what I find is most RevOps teams are significantly under-resourced, right? And you never want to be scaling your RevOps team to the point that you're scaling your go-to-market. The ratio does matter. And personally, for me, If it's a heavy build, I don't know if I'm going to really build it. And the reason for that is there are so many other things that my team, my systems architect, my devs need to focus on to run the business versus investing them in a product development life cycle. I'm like, I have to not just think about, well, yeah, it's free because we're building it in-house. I'm like, no, it's not free. It's not free because we're paying that dev, let's call it $250 to $300 an hour, probably grossed up, maybe more. And then in addition to that, if he or she is working on that, what are they not doing to run the business? So there is an opportunity cost related. Now, again, it depends on the size of the problem. I think if it's lightweight, if it's understood, if maybe we just need to build an MVP and a proof of concept to determine if it's worthwhile to invest, that all in, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I like that approach because so many times we see that people think, oh, our dev team can build this. And they can. Anyone can build anything as long as you put enough time and effort to it. But that time and effort, that really becomes a question. Can you sustain that time and effort to get to where you would have been if you had bought it? Or is it, we'll get to MVP and we'll get to something later, but really that doesn't usually happen because more priorities come up, different things.
100%. And in addition, I mean, we've worked with technical teams before. I've had a number of engineers report into me. An engineer has different capabilities. Some of them have very niche skills. I know a lot of engineers that build product, they don't want to touch Salesforce and vice versa, And so like, what are the skills that you have in-house? How are you best deploying those skills for the maximal utility is something that I'm going to ask myself a question about.
Nice. Yeah. Smart. Exactly. Because you'll end up sinking a ton of time, a ton of mental capacity as well from all teams, not just the developers who are implementing it around that. People asking for more, putting more sprints in the backlog and whatnot.
Yeah. I'll say just because you can build it doesn't mean you should.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's great. And then I think one of the other sides is that when you're building something, you want to make sure that it integrates with all these other systems and
yes. Tools. 1,000%. Sorry, keep going, but I just had to echo that. I completely agree.
Yeah, no, it's super important because right now I think there's a lot of orchestration that happens in RevOps to try and make sure that all these great systems and tools that were probably purchased for those 2 or 3 primary use cases that you talked about can also do a few other things, but really need to be able to integrate with each other so that you can be passing that data along the customer journey, if you will, along the tech stack that goes along with that customer journey, from the Marketo to Salesforce, et cetera.
Absolutely. And I think it's a critical component of the path towards consolidation. Companies or tools or technologies that I look at, I am looking at their ability to integrate. I am looking at their integration roadmap, right? Like that is really important. I'm not a big believer that everything has to be all in one system, not necessarily, but I don't want to have like 40 bespoke, unique systems. I know I just said I had 40 systems, but they serve very different use cases, right? And so I think, a trend that I'm seeing actually right now, it's like an arms race, like Gong and Clarion. I think Outreach is throwing it in there and they all have call recording and note taking. And now they're all having bidirectional integration. And now they're starting to think about visibility and single pane of glass into your deal flow. Why are they doing that? Because more and more teams are wanting to think about what is one tool I can use across so many different use cases for my full go-to-market. It's hard enough to get people to use one tool. For me to try and get them to use many is even more hard. So I'm going to double down on the one where I have some traction.
Love the pun. Yeah.
Sorry about my dogs, by the way. You can bleep that out.
Oh, it's great. No, you can't really hear it. Yeah, no, we are seeing that all the time as well. And yet there's always this controversy between, do you buy the best in the market or do you buy one that maybe does a jack of all trades kind of thing? What would be your preference, to pick the market leader of that particular use case or one that can solve lots of use cases along that path?
Oh gosh, let's see. What do I think about when I'm selecting a technology? Because I definitely want to ensure first and foremost that they know how to solve my use case, because again, that's what I'm going to go to gain buy-in from all of the other internal stakeholders. And if I flash up and say they're going to solve this problem at the end of that term, they have not solved that problem, You know whose name is in fire? Mine, right? And so we have to solve, that's primary. But I do say, okay, that's what we have to solve now. What does our future roadmap look like from a RevOps perspective? So I always have at least a 12 to 18 month roadmap. I mean, some people have 3-year roadmaps, but the way that go-to-market shapes, like, is your 3-year roadmap going to still be applicable in a year and a half? Probably not, honestly, but 12 to 18 months, yes. And so then I think, how is this going to help us scale? What other problems based off things that I've seen happen over the course of our growth that I anticipate we're going to hit? How does it solve some of those problems? So really aligning it to your roadmap, very critical. The other thing that I really anchor around is, and I think it's maybe, I don't know if it's less talked about, but it's highly important to me, is the customer experience. I am heavily judging a vendor based on the experience that I have in buying. Are they somebody that listens well? Are they somebody that follows up? Are they somebody that is responsive? Are they somebody that I like engaging with? You know, what does their support function look like? Can I get the answers that I need? Do I feel like they have a deep level of expertise? Are they honest, or are they just trying to sell me all the time? These moments really, really matter, because probably one of the top reasons that I churn software is a poor customer experience.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, if you're not having that engagement on the other side, the tool might be apples to apples to another one. But if you're getting a much better experience with someone else and more help rolling it out and making sure it's effective, then it can make all the difference in the world.